She was not supposed to survive the night. Neither was he. And yet, there she was, no larger than a folded prayer, her newborn cry swallowed almost whole by the howling wind, lying in a basket on the stone steps of a man whose hands had ended 17 lives, and whose heart, everyone in Seoul's underworld agreed, had long ago turned to iron. Kang Jae-won stood at the tall window of his study, a glass of whiskey held loosely in his fingers, watching the storm devour the city below. It was the kind of storm that felt personal, the kind that bent oak trees sideways and sent iron gates crashing against their posts, the kind that sent ordinary men fleeing indoors and made powerful men feel, just for a moment, small. He was not afraid of storms. He had walked through worse. But something made him uneasy that night. Some tremor in his chest he could not name, and he had stood at that window for nearly an hour without touching his drink. He heard it between the thunderclaps, so faint at first that he thought it was the wind taking a strange shape around the mansion's stone corners, a thin, reedy sound, almost musical. He tilted his head, listening with the same intensity he brought to negotiations and interrogations, the same absolute stillness that made grown men sweat. Then the lightning came and lit up the front steps, and he saw the basket. He set down his glass without thinking. He was moving before the thunder followed, striding through the marble corridor, barking at the guard posted at the entry. The guard, a young man named Seo, barely 23, had already opened the front door a crack, peering out with wide eyes. "Sir, there is something—" "I know," Jae-won said. "Move." He went out into the rain without a coat, without hesitation, as though the storm owed him nothing and he owed the storm nothing in return. He crouched at the foot of the steps where the basket sat wedged against the stone balustrade, its wicker sides dark with rain, a thin square of oilcloth barely protecting what lay inside. He pulled back the cloth. A baby girl, perhaps 1 day old, perhaps 2. Skin still red and wrinkled, the cord recently cut and tied. Her eyes were pressed tightly shut, her tiny fists clenched on either side of her face, and she was screaming with everything she had. A scream that held no strategy, no manipulation, no politics. Just pure, naked need. Kang Jae-won, who had not cried in 11 years, felt something move behind his ribs like the turning of a lock he had forgotten was there. "Sir," Seo's voice came from the doorway. "Should I call the police? The hospital?" Jae-won did not answer immediately. He was looking at the child. She had stopped screaming the moment he lifted her against his chest, as though she recognized, in some animal way, that she had found the largest shelter in her immediate world. Her wet head tucked under his chin. Her heartbeat, impossibly fast, impossibly small, drummed against his wet shirt. "No," he said. "Sir? Close the door, Seo, and call Ji-young. Tell her to bring everything she needs for a newborn." A pause, long enough that Jae-won turned and met the young guard's eyes. "Yes, sir," Seo said finally, and shut the door. Inside, standing beneath the crystal chandelier of his entry hall, Kang Jae-won looked down at the child who had fallen asleep against his chest, with the absolute trust of someone who did not yet know that trust could be broken. Rain dripped from his hair, from his jaw, pooled around his shoes on the marble floor. He had built an empire on fear. He had dismantled other men's empires with patience and precision. He had given orders that could not be taken back. He had never, not once in 41 years, wanted something he could not explain. He wanted to keep her. The thought arrived fully formed, with no preamble, the way certain truths do, the way lightning arrives. Not gradual, not argued into existence, simply there. He looked around the vast, cold entry hall of the mansion that had never once felt like a home. He thought about the oak-paneled study where no child had ever laughed. He thought about the long dining table where he ate alone every evening, reading reports. Then he looked at the child again. "Okay," he said quietly, to her, to the storm, to whatever force had placed her on his steps. Okay, I have you. Park Ji-young arrived in 40 minutes flat, which meant she had driven through the worst of the storm at speeds that had no doubt terrified her driver. She was 61 years old, white-haired, and built like a woman who had made peace with every difficulty life had ever offered her. She had been Kang Jae-won's household manager for 14 years, long enough to have seen things that would have shattered a more fragile person, and she had long ago decided that her employer, for all his darkness, had a soul that was simply buried too deep for most people to find. She took the child from his arms, assessed her with clinical efficiency, and declared her healthy if dangerously underdressed for the weather. She sent a driver to purchase formula and blankets. She set up a temporary crib in the small sitting room adjacent to the kitchen, where it was warmest. She did all of this without asking a single question. It was only after the baby was settled, fed, and asleep, cheeks flushed pink, one fist pressed to her mouth, that Ji-young looked at Jae-won across the crib and said simply, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to raise her," he said. Ji-young did not blink. "You understand what you're saying?" "I understand exactly what I'm saying. There will be questions, from your associates, from the authorities, eventually. There are always questions. I always have answers." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the sleeping child. Then she said, "She needs a name." He had already thought about this, which surprised him. "Naeun," he said. "Kang Naeun." Ji-young nodded once, as though this settled something important. "Then I will need the name of a discreet doctor and a lawyer who can handle the paperwork. I'll have both by morning." Ji-young looked at him once more, at the man who had arrived at her call still damp from the storm, who stood over a stolen child's crib with an expression she had never once seen on his face in 14 years. Tenderness, raw and unguarded and entirely real. She had wondered sometimes whether love of any kind still lived in him. Now she knew. The years that followed were, by any reasonable measure, implausible. Kang Jae-won, the man whom rival organizations referred to as Cheol-yeol, Iron Blood, learned to make warm formula at 2 in the morning. He learned which lullaby stopped the crying faster than any other. He learned that small children have no respect for business calls and will say so loudly. He learned that scraped knees hurt him more than they hurt her because she cried for 30 seconds and then wanted to run again. And he stood there watching her go with something clenched in his chest that he had no professional vocabulary for. Naeun grew the way children do when they are fiercely loved, quickly, brilliantly, with a personality so vivid it filled every room she entered. She had dark eyes that caught light like obsidian, and a laugh that startled people, because it was too loud and too joyful for someone so small, and she gave it freely, without calculation. She called him Appa from the first word she had for him, and hearing it, that simple, weighted syllable, did something to Jae-won's nervous system that no threat had ever managed. She made him better, without knowing it. He cut back on certain operations. He moved money into cleaner channels. He was not a good man. He knew this, had never pretended otherwise. But he became a man with something worth protecting, which is a different thing. And in certain lights it resembles goodness. By the time Naeun was 5, she had a bedroom that looked like a princess had decorated it at full budget. By the time she was 7, she was beating him at chess, and couldn't understand why this made him happy. By 9, she had a piano teacher, a taekwondo instructor, and a habit of bringing home stray cats that Ji-young catalogued with resigned affection. Only a small circle knew the truth about her origins. Jae-won's lawyer, a man named Oh Hyun-sik, who had arranged the paperwork with sufficient creativity that the question of Naeun's biological parents was deeply buried in the kind of legal architecture that takes decades to excavate. Ji-young, whose loyalty was absolute. Seo, the young guard who had been at the door that night, who had since been promoted twice, and who would have walked into fire before he spoke a word. And Min Cheol-soo. That name would matter later. Cheol-soo was Jae-won's second in command, To a man of 38, with a smile that arrived slightly after his eyes and cold intelligence behind both. He had been at Jaewon's side for a decade and had always believed correctly that he was being evaluated for eventual succession. He was loyal in the way men are loyal when loyalty serves their interests, which is not the same as loyalty at all. He knew about Naeun. He had been told the official version, that she was the daughter of a distant relative who had died, and that Jaewon had taken guardianship. He had smiled when told this, and said all the right things, and had immediately begun to wonder how a child could be used. He was not a man who could look at anything warm without calculating its value as leverage. Naeun was 9 years old when the photograph arrived. It came inside an ordinary envelope, no return address, slipped beneath the front gate of the mansion on a Tuesday morning. Jaewon opened it at his desk, expecting a message from one of his contacts. Instead, he found a single photograph, printed on glossy paper showing a woman. She was perhaps 30. Thin in a way that suggested hardship rather than intention. Dark hair cut bluntly at the jaw. Eyes that, even in a still image, communicated a complex kind of pain. Not the pain of injury, but the pain of something done that cannot be undone. On the back of the photograph, in small, careful handwriting, "I know where my daughter is. I am not here to destroy what you have built. But I need you to know that I exist. I will be in touch." Jaewon read the note 3 times. Then he placed the photograph face down on his desk and sat for a long time without moving. He thought about that night 9 years ago, the storm, the basket, the oilcloth barely keeping the rain off a child who had been left to fate with deliberate intention. Left. Not misplaced. Not accidentally lost. Deliberately placed and deliberately walked away from. He thought about Naeun at the breakfast table that morning, arguing with Ji Young about whether sweet potatoes should be allowed at breakfast, her school uniform already slightly crooked, her voice bright and indignant. He thought about what the word daughter meant and who had earned it. He called Oh Hyun-sik. "Find out everything there is to know about a woman who may have had a child 9 years ago," he said. "Circumstances that would have made her abandon a newborn. Start with hospitals, social services, police reports. She is perhaps 30 now. Start with the date." He gave the date. "Be discreet. Be thorough, and Hyun-sik, tell no one else." The lawyer asked no questions. This was why he was paid extraordinarily well. Her name was Song Yeon-hee, 29 years old, currently employed as a seamstress at a small garment factory in Incheon. Previously, 3 different addresses in 4 years, 2 different names, 1 record of a psychiatric hold. Formerly, the daughter of a mid-level accountant for a criminal organization that had been dismantled, absorbed, and effectively erased 8 years ago. Formerly, the girlfriend of a man named Bak Dong-hyun, who had worked for that same organization, who had discovered that she was pregnant, who had told her the child was a liability, and who had, Hyun-sik reported this part carefully, made very clear what would happen to both of them if the child's existence became known. She had been 19 when she became pregnant, 20 when she gave birth, alone in a rented room, with no one who could help her, and no path she could see that did not end in death. She had wrapped the child in what she had. She had driven to the part of the city where she had heard Kang Jae-won's name spoken with a particular kind of reverence, the reverence given to power that protects as well as harms. And she had placed her daughter at his gate in the worst storm of the year, trusting that a man of that stature would not leave a child to die. She had been right. She had walked away and not looked back. She had told herself this was love. She had spent 9 years not being certain whether that was true. Jaewon read the file twice. He set it down. He did not feel what he expected to feel. He did not feel rage or threat, or the cold calculus of danger assessment. He felt, with unexpected clarity, something close to grief, not for himself, but for her. For a 19-year-old girl with no good choices, standing in a storm, doing the only thing she could imagine that might save her child's life. He thought, I would have done the same. Then he thought, but she still does not get her back. These two thoughts existed simultaneously in him, without apparent contradiction, and this was the beginning of the most difficult period of his life. He arranged the meeting himself, without telling anyone. A small cafe in Mapo, neutral territory, midday. He arrived early and took a table in the back. He ordered 2 coffees and waited. Song Yeon-hee arrived exactly on time, which told him something. She was thinner in person than the photograph suggested. She wore a plain dark coat and carried a bag that was practical rather than fashionable. She moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned not to take up space. When she saw him, she stopped for a moment. He was, objectively, an imposing man. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with the kind of stillness that powerful men cultivate and dangerous men inherit. She had known, obviously, who he was. But knowing and seeing are different. She sat down across from him. They looked at each other. You have her, she said. Not a question. I have my daughter, he said. Deliberate, measured. Her jaw tightened slightly. I gave birth to her. You left her in a basket in a storm. I left her where I knew she would be found. Her voice did not waver. By you. Because I knew you wouldn't ignore her. Something shifted in his assessment of her. She had done her research too then. She had chosen him specifically, not randomly. Why are you here now? He asked. Because she's 9 years old and I've been watching from a distance for 9 years and I need to know if she's... Her voice broke, barely, almost inaudibly. She pressed her lips together. I need to know if she's happy. The silence between them stretched. Outside, the cafe noise continued. Cups, conversation, a television on the wall. Ordinary life, indifferent to the extraordinary thing happening at the back table. She is happy, he said. She is healthy. She is brilliant and loud, and she beats me at chess, and she is... He paused, and something genuine came into his expression. Involuntary. The most important person I have ever known. Yeon-hee looked at her coffee. She did not drink it. I don't want to take her from you, she said quietly. Dee-hee said nothing. But I want... She stopped. I don't know what I want. I want her to know she wasn't thrown away. I want her to know that I... She doesn't know she's adopted, he said. Yeon-hee looked up sharply. She's 9, he said. And the life she knows is the only one she has ever known. I was going to tell her. When she was older. When she could hold it. And what would you tell her? He met her eyes. That she was found in a storm and loved from the first moment. That is the truth. It is not all of the truth. No, it isn't. Another silence. This one heavier. I'm not going to cause trouble, Yeon-hee said. I'm not going to go to the authorities. I made a choice 9 years ago and I cannot undo it and I am not... She stopped again. Her hands, flat on the table, were very still. I am not the enemy. I know, he said. She seemed surprised by this. I read the file, he said. I know what Dong-hyun threatened you with. I know what your choices were. He let a pause land. He is no longer in any position to threaten anyone. She stared at him. Understanding arrived slowly, then all at once. You... I did not do anything, he said, his voice flat and final. That requires your gratitude or your condemnation. What I did to protect a number of people, years ago. It is not relevant to this conversation. She looked at her hands. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright but not spilling. What happens now? She asked. It was the question he had been asking himself since the photograph arrived. I don't know yet, he said, which was the most honest thing he had said to anyone in years. But I will not make a decision that hurts her. Whatever comes next. That is the boundary. Yeon-hee nodded. Once. Like a person accepting terms they have no power to renegotiate. She left before he did. He watched her go through the cafe window, walking in the cold winter light, saw her dark coat disappearing around a corner, and he thought, "This is not over. This is, in fact, only beginning." It was, in the end, a small mistake. The kind that is not a mistake at all until it is catastrophic. Jae-won had used his personal driver for the meeting in Mapo. His personal driver reported to Cheol-soo on matters the driver considered routine, location check-ins, a protocol Jae-won had established years ago for security and had since forgotten to revoke. Cheol-soo noted the cafe, noted the unusual nature of a solo, unannounced meeting, and had someone there within 20 minutes of Jae-won's arrival. Too late to see the meeting, but not too late to pull the security camera footage from the cafe's exterior, which showed a woman in a dark coat entering and leaving. Cheol-soo was patient. He ran the face through every available database, called in favors, spent 3 weeks. He found Song Yeon-hee. He found, with slightly more effort, and the connection that Jae-won's lawyer had buried so carefully, the records of a birth, the timing, the absence of a death certificate, the unusual series of legal moves that had resulted in a child appearing in Jae-won's household. He put it together with the surgical efficiency of a man who had spent a decade learning to think like his employer. Kang Na-eun was not the daughter of a dead relative. Kang Na-eun was the biological child of a woman named Song Yeon-hee. And Song Yeon-hee was still alive and had recently made contact with Jae-won. This information, in the right hands, was extraordinarily valuable. Cheol-soo sat with it for 2 weeks, turning it over, considering angles. There was a man named Park Sung-jin, a rival, a threat, a person who had been attempting to absorb Jae-won's operations for 3 years with increasing aggression, who would pay enormously well for this, not to harm the child. Cheol-soo told himself this firmly. It is simply to create leverage, simply to force a negotiation that Jae-won's pride had been preventing. He told himself that harm and leverage were different things. He had always been good at telling himself convenient stories. She was not supposed to be in the house that afternoon. She was supposed to be at taekwondo practice, which she had quietly skipped because she had a book she wanted to finish, and she had calculated, correctly, when that Ji-young would not check the practice schedule until dinner. She was 11 now. 2 years had passed since the photograph arrived, 2 years in which Jae-won had met Yeon-hee 3 more times, always in neutral locations, always without telling anyone. And she had developed, along with her chess skill and her piano ability, and her collection of 6 cats, a talent for quiet observation that would have alarmed her father had he known she possessed it. She was in the library, tucked behind the large chair by the east window, when she heard Cheol-soo's voice in the adjacent corridor. He was on his phone. She caught it in fragments, the way you hear things you were not meant to hear. Incomplete, impressionistic, but enough. His name, her father's name, a woman's name she didn't recognize. And then, clearly, unmistakably, a phrase that rearranged her understanding of everything. The girl isn't his. She never was. She has a mother who's still breathing. Naeun sat behind the chair for a very long time after the voice moved away. She was 11 years old and she had her father's gift for stillness. She did not cry. She did not move. She thought, with the methodical precision of a chess player, about every memory she could access, every small inconsistency she had filed away and never examined, every time a question about grandparents or relatives had been deflected with warmth and efficiency, every way in which she looked slightly different from the photographs of her father as a young man. She had always known, she realized, not consciously, but somewhere below consciousness, in the place where the body keeps the truths the mind is not ready for. She had always known. That night at dinner, she was quiet, and her father looked at her across the long table and said, "Something happened today." It was not a question. He read her the way she could read him, Cho, and she had never decided whether she found this comforting or terrifying. "Appa," she said, "are you my father?" The silence that followed was the longest of his life. He set down his chopsticks. He looked at his daughter across the lacquered surface of the table, her dark eyes meeting his, steady as a compass, waiting. He had planned for this conversation. He had rehearsed versions of it in his head for years. In none of his rehearsals had he been ambushed by it at dinner by a child who already knew. Yes, he said, in every way that matters. She considered this. But not in every way. No, not in every way. She nodded slowly. Tell me. He told her. Not everything, not the parts she did not need yet, but the essential shape of it, the storm, the basket, the moment on the steps, the name he had given her, the choice he had made. He did not make himself the hero of the story. He tried, as best he could, to give her the truth in a form she could hold. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Did she not want me?" He thought of Yeon-hee in the cafe, her hands flat on the table, her eyes bright. He thought of the careful intelligence of a young woman who had placed her child with precision rather than carelessness. She wanted you to live, he said. She did the only thing that could make that possible. Nan looked at her food, then at her hands, then at him. What's her name? She asked. Song Yeon-hee. A pause. Have you met her? He did not flinch. Yes. Recently? Yes. And you didn't tell me? No. I was protecting you. I am not certain I made the right choice. She looked at him for a long time, with those dark eyes that had been his since she was 1 day old and screaming in a storm. Then she said something that broke him open quietly, the way the best things do. You always tell me when you don't know if you're right. That's how I know you're trying. He could not speak for a moment. I want to meet her, Naeun said. Okay. But you are my appa. That doesn't change. No, he said. It doesn't. He found out about Cheol-soo on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after the dinner conversation with Naeun. One of his intelligence contacts, a woman named Lee Bora, who handled information the way a surgeon handles instruments, with precision and no wasted motion, placed a file on his desk and said nothing. She did not need to. The file contained transcripts, photographs, a bank transfer record, and a meeting log that told a complete story in the way that devastating things always tell complete stories. Simply, without room for alternative interpretation. Cheol-soo had approached Park Sung-jin, and he had offered the information about Naeun's parentage as leverage in a broader negotiation. He had not, Bora confirmed quietly, suggested violence against the child. He had framed it as social and legal pressure. The revelation that Kang Jae-won had illegally obtained a child, falsified records, concealed the existence of a biological parent. The kind of revelation that, in the right regulatory and media environment, could dismantle both the man and the organization. He had also, and this was the detail Jae-won returned to, again and again, pressing on it like a bruise, provided Yeon-hee's current address to Park Sung-jin's people. Not to harm her, probably only leverage. But the distinction between probably and certainly was the distance between alive and not, and Jae-won knew this better than anyone. He called Bora. Is she safe? For now. I put a watch on her the moment I confirm the address leak. Nothing has moved yet. Keep the watch. Double it. He paused. Cheol-soo. Find him. Already have. He's at his apartment in Gangnam. Tell him I'd like to have breakfast. The breakfast that followed was not pleasant. It was, by contrast, remarkably quiet. 2 men at a table, one of whom had already decided, and the other of whom was only beginning to understand that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Cheol-soo tried 3 different versions of the truth before abandoning the exercise. Jae-won let him try all 3 before speaking. You used my daughter, he said at last. Cheol-soo said, she is not your... The table moved slightly. No one had visibly caused this. It simply moved. Cheol-soo stopped speaking. She is my daughter, Jae-won said. His voice had the quality of deep water, still on the surface, incomprehensibly deep below. Whatever you believe about biology or law or legitimacy, she is my daughter. And you used her. A long silence. You will remove yourself from this organization, Jaewon said. You will transfer everything to which you have access. You will leave Seoul within 72 hours. You will not contact Park Sung-jin or anyone associated with him. And you will not, ever, in any way, for any reason, come near my daughter or her mother. And if I don't? Jaewon picked up his coffee, drank it, set it down. You're very intelligent, Cheol-soo, he said. You've always been intelligent. So I trust you to answer that question yourself. Cheol-soo was on a flight to Busan before midnight. The meeting was arranged for a Sunday, at a small park near Han River, not the grand kind with food stalls and tourists, but a quiet section where plane trees lined the path, and old men played baduk on stone tables, and the city noise receded to something manageable. Jaewon walked with Nayeon to the bench, where Yeon-hee waited. He could feel the tension in Nayeon's stride. She moved with careful precision when she was nervous, each step slightly more deliberate than necessary, a habit he recognized because he had the same one. Yeon-hee stood when she saw them coming. She was wearing a pale blue coat. She looked, Jaewon thought, like a woman who had spent years preparing for a moment and was now discovering that preparation and readiness are different things. Her face was very still and very open, all her armor set aside in a way that must have cost her considerably. Naeun stopped 3 feet away from her. They looked at each other, the woman and the girl, and the silence between them was not empty but full, packed with every year that had not happened between them, every birthday without acknowledgement, every scraped knee iced by someone else's hands. Then Naeun said, "You have the same eyes as me." Yeon-hee's composure broke, quietly, like ice over a deep river. Not a collapse, but a yielding. "Yes," she said. Her voice was a thread. "I noticed that too, from the photographs." "Appa showed you photographs?" She looked at Jaewon briefly. "He did." Nayeon considered this. Then she said, with the directness of a child and the weight of something older, "Why did you leave me?" Yeon-hee did not look away. She sat down on the bench and told Nayeon the truth. Not the full truth, not the dangerous parts, but the essential core of it, that she had been young and frightened and in danger, and that she had chosen the only path she could see that kept her daughter alive, and that every day since had been something she had carried. "Were you sad?" Nayeon asked. "Every day," Yeon-hee said. "Do you want me back?" Yeon-hee paused, looked at Jaewon, looked at Nayeon. "I want you to be happy," she said carefully. "I can see that you are. And I want—" She stopped. "I would like, if you were willing, it to know you, not to replace what you have, to add something, if you want that." Nayeon looked at the river. A long beat. "I have 6 cats," she said finally. "Are you allergic?" Yeon-hee laughed, startled. A real laugh, sudden and full. "No," she said. "Good," Naeun said. "Ji-young says we have enough cats. I say we don't. You can be on my side." Jaewon sat on the other end of the bench and watched his daughter negotiate the contours of an impossible situation with the grace of someone twice her age and the practicality of someone who had grown up learning that most problems yield to the right combination of patience and directness. He thought, "She got that from both of us." The thought surprised him. Then it did not. There is no clean ending to a story built on storms. Clean endings are for fairy tales. And this was never a fairy tale. It was something messier and more real, the kind of story that continues past the telling of it, that keeps generating questions long after the audience goes home. In the weeks that followed the park meeting, Naeun began a cautious, gradual acquaintance with Yeon-hee that resisted easy categorization. It was not a mother-daughter relationship, not yet, perhaps not ever in the conventional sense. It was something without a clean name. Sunday afternoons, He shared meals occasionally, a woman teaching a girl to sew because the girl had decided, with characteristic intensity, that she wanted to learn. Messages exchanged, a relationship being built from scratch, slowly, without the infrastructure of history. Jaewon watched this from a careful distance. He did not interfere. He did not withdraw. He occupied the space that had always been his, Appa, unambiguous, first, and made room around it. He was not, he reflected, a man built for sharing. He had spent his life acquiring and consolidating, and the instinct to close his hands around what was his ran deep. But Naeun was not a thing to be possessed, and he had known this from the first moment on the steps, with the rain falling and her heartbeat against his chest. She had always been too large for ownership. She was not his to keep. She was his to love. There is a difference. It took him a long time to understand it fully. Yeonhee, for her part, entered this new territory with the precision and care of someone who had spent years managing the distance between what she wanted and what she deserved. She did not push. She did not recede. She was simply present, consistently, without agenda. And presence without agenda is one of the rarest and most valuable things a person can offer. There were people who questioned the arrangement. There were raised eyebrows in Jaewon's world, a world not known for its nuance in matters of family and legitimacy. There were those who thought Yeonhee's reappearance was dangerous, who advised Jaewon to deal with the situation with the finality he was known for in other contexts. He declined their advice. He declined it each time with the same quiet certainty with which he had made every significant decision of his life, and eventually the questions stopped. Park Sung-jin, deprived of his leverage by Cheol-soo's removal from the picture, made 2 more attempts at pressure over the following year, before concluding that Kang Jae-won was unmovable on this front and redirecting his ambitions elsewhere. Cheol-soo was never heard from in Seoul again. Bora remained. She was, Jae-won had decided, the best intelligence mind he had ever employed, and she was also the only person on his staff who had ever told him directly and without apology that she thought his personal choices were occasionally more interesting than his professional ones. He had not fired her for this. Naeun turned 12 and asked her father, with the curiosity of a child who does not yet know which questions are supposed to be unanswerable, whether he would ever consider marrying Yeonhee. He had stared at her. "You make a face when she leaves," Naeun said matter-of-factly, returning to her chess problem. "I'm not supposed to notice, but I do." "You notice too much," he said. "You taught me to," she said. He did not answer her question that evening, but he thought about it, the way he thought about certain untenable positions on a chessboard. Not with avoidance, but with the careful attention of someone mapping out what is actually possible from where the pieces currently stand. He was not a man made for ordinary things. He was not a man who arrived at love by the conventional route. He had arrived at fatherhood through a storm, and at tenderness through a child who had trusted him before she had language for trust. And he had arrived at whatever this new thing was, the same way he arrived at everything that mattered. Unexpectedly, and with no plan for what came next. It is a Thursday evening in late autumn when Bora calls. Naeun is at the piano in the music room, working through a passage she has been arguing with for a week, the notes coming in careful iterations, wrong, and then less wrong, and then almost right. Jae-won can hear it from his study, a sound that has become, over 12 years, the most reliable backdrop to his evenings. He answers Bora's call. "Song Yeon-hee received a visit today," Bora says, without preamble. From a woman who identified herself as a paralegal representing a family law firm. The woman served Yeon-hee with a document. Jae-won is very still. What document? "A notice of intent to file a maternal custody claim," Bora says, "on behalf of Song Yeon-hee. The question being put to a family court is whether the biological mother of a child currently living under informal and potentially irregular adoption circumstances has a legal right to petition for..." "Who retained the firm?" A pause. That's the part that doesn't make sense yet. The retaining party appears to be Yan He herself. But she made no mention of this to you? No. And she doesn't seem to have the resources to retain this particular firm independently. So someone funded it? Yes. Find out who. He sets down the phone. He sits in the silence of his study, listening to the piano from the music room. The passage finally finding its resolution, note by note by note, Nayun's hands working through to the other side of the problem. He does not know whether Yan He sent this notice herself. Out of a change of heart he was not shown. He does not know whether someone is moving her like a piece on a board without her knowledge. He does not know whether what is coming is a war or a misunderstanding or something else entirely. Some third thing without a name. As messy and human and unresolvable as the storm that started all of this. What he knows is this: he will not fight with the weapons he is most practiced with. Not this time. Not over this. He will not buy this outcome or threaten it into shape or make it clean by force. Because somewhere down the hall, a girl is at a piano working through a problem with patience, and she learned that from him, and whatever happens next has to be worthy of what she learned. Outside, the first rain of the season begins to fall. He listens to it hit the glass. He waits. The music continues. And if you want to know what happens next, whether Kang Nayun chooses the man who raised her or the woman who bore her, and who is truly behind the custody claim, leave a comment below. The sequel is waiting for you.